The wind howled across the battlements of Winterfell as Jon Snow tightened the straps on his saddle. The raven had come at dawn. Its words were brief but heavy. King Robert Baratheon is dead, poisoned, and Eddard Stark had been taken prisoner in King's Landing. Robb stood beside him, his face pale and drawn, but his eyes burned with a cold fire Jon had never seen before. There was no room for boyish laughter now. The Robb who used to joke about swordplay and jest with Theon Greyjoy was gone. In his place stood a lord with war in his heart. "They've killed the king," Robb said bitterly. "And father?" "They've taken him like some common thief." Jon didn't reply. His mind was racing. Robert's death didn't sit right. Poison wasn't a Lannister weapon, it was a coward's tool. But something deeper stirred within him. Ned Stark had served Robert faithfully. If Robert was dead and Ned imprisoned, it could only mean one thing: betrayal. "I'm going with you," Jon said at last. Robb turned sharply. "To war. To justice," Jon answered. "If the Lannisters think they can take the crown and throw our father in chains, they've forgotten who we are." For a long moment, Robb looked at him, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. Jon was a bastard sworn to the Night's Watch. He had taken vows to wear no crown, hold no lands, father no children. But even vows had limits, and Jon Snow had found his. "Brother," Robb said at last, clasping Jon's forearm, "and then we ride together. For the North. For father. For Robert." But the path ahead was far from simple. Jon broke his vows that night. Ghost padded silently behind him as he left Castle Black under cover of darkness, abandoning the Watch and everything he had known. He would be a deserter, a hunted man, but he no longer cared. The world of honor was crumbling, and only those who fought back would survive. Robb gathered his bannermen. The direwolves howled as the banners of House Stark were raised once again, not for rebellion but for vengeance, for truth, for the fallen king who had once ridden with Eddard Stark through the fires of rebellion. As they marched south, news traveled faster than horses. Whispers of Robert's sudden death grew darker. Some said Queen Cersei had poisoned him with strong wine during a private hunt. Others claimed Ser Shaimi had arranged the whole thing. But all agreed on one thing: Joffrey Baratheon had taken the throne, and Eddard Stark had been arrested for treason. The North did not forget, nor did they forgive. Jon and Robb rode side by side, the weight of the North behind them. They had no illusions. This was no simple campaign. They weren't just rescuing a father. They were challenging a kingdom. The crown sat uneasily on a boy's head, and the Lannisters held the strings. In secret, Jon wrote a letter to Stannis Baratheon, Robert's true brother. "If you are the rightful heir," Jon wrote, "then you will want proof that Joffrey is not Robert's son. My father has that proof, and for it he now sits in chains. Help us free him, and the North will stand behind your claim." It was a gamble, but the kind of war they were riding into would require more than northern steel. It would need allies and fire. At Moat Cailin they paused. Maester Luwin delivered grim news. Ned Stark was to be executed at Baela's Sept. They had days at best. Robb gritted his teeth. "We ride day and night." But Jon had a different idea. "Send me ahead, just me. Let me into the city. If I can reach father first, I may buy us time. You'll be alone. I have Ghost and a blade." Robb hesitated. "If you're caught—" "I'm already a traitor," Jon cut in. "What's one more sin for a Stark?" Robb nodded, silent. He watched his brother ride south, cloaked in black, hair whipping in the wind. The bastard of Winterfell was gone. In his place rode a wolf with vengeance in his heart. That's the end of part 1. The King's Road was quieter than Jon expected. Merchants were few, and most common folk hurried past without making eye contact. Whispers of Robert Baratheon's death had soured the air. People sensed the realm was cracking, even if they didn't have the words for it. Jon rode fast, cloaked and hooded, with Ghost never far behind. The direwolf moved like a shadow, a silent sentinel on the dirt paths. They stopped only when necessary, changing horses, gathering bits of stale bread, drinking from cold streams. Jon's thoughts never left King's Landing. Every hoofbeat was a prayer that he wasn't too late. By the time he saw the Red Keep in the distance, the city had already started to rot from within. King's Landing stank of smoke and sweat, Gold cloaks patrolled the streets more aggressively. The people murmured about Queen Cersei's iron rule and her cruel boy-king who laughed at executions. Jon's cloak did little to hide the northern stiffness in his walk, but few paid attention to one more travel-worn stranger among thousands. He found shelter in Flea Bottom, a place filled with rats, both the animal kind and the kind that walked upright. Ghost waited in the shadows, his red eyes enough to keep anyone from creeping too close. Jon slept little that night, curled in a corner of a brothel cellar, listening to drunks argue about the traitor Ned Stark and how that boy Joffrey's got more balls than the last king. By morning, Jon had a plan. He couldn't walk into the Red Keep. He needed someone inside, someone who could be trusted or at least bribed. He remembered a name his father once spoke in passing: Varys, the Spider, the Master of Whisperers. A dangerous man, a possible ally, or a death sentence. Jon slipped coins to a street boy with sharp eyes and sent him with a message: "A son of Eddard Stark seeks your ear." The wolves do not sleep. That night he waited. Just when he began to doubt the message had reached the Spider, a pale girl appeared at the cellar door. She said nothing, only gestured. Jon followed her through winding alleys, Ghost silent at his heel. They entered a hidden passage beneath a ruined stable. The girl vanished, and in her place stood a bald, soft-spoken man in robes. "Lord Snow," Varys said without a hint of surprise. "Or should I say, the bastard wolf who defies his vows?" Jon's hand moved to Longclaw's hilt, but Varys raised a placating hand. "Peace, I've no interest in gold today. Only information. You have arrived at a dangerous hour." "My father," Jon began, but Varys interrupted. "Will be executed within the week. Unless something changes. The Queen is eager to end it. Joffrey thirsts for blood. He calls it justice." "I need to get to him," Jon said. Varys gave a thin smile. "You're brave. Or foolish. Perhaps both. I don't care. I have to try." The Spider considered him for a long moment. Then, without a word, he turned and beckoned Jon to follow. They passed through darkness, deeper and deeper, into the hidden veins of the Red Keep. Finally, they came to a chamber with a grated wall. Behind it, Jon could hear a voice, familiar, calm, unbroken: Eddard Stark. He sat alone in chains, speaking softly to himself. Jon's throat tightened. For a moment, he felt like a child again, sneaking into his father's solar. He wanted to shout, to reach out, but Varys put a finger to his lips. "You have 1 minute," Varys whispered. Jon knelt beside the grate. "Father," he whispered. Ned Stark turned sharply, eyes narrowing, then widening. "Jon?" "I've come," Jon said, barely holding his voice steady. "Robb is riding south. We will not let them kill you." Ned looked tired, older, yet the steel was still there. "You shouldn't have come." "The Night's Watch." "I left," Jon said. "I broke my vows." Silence. Ned's face fell with grief, not anger. "You shouldn't have, but I understand." Jon nodded. "There's more. Robert was murdered, poisoned. We're going to prove it. Robb sent ravens. We've reached out to Stannis." At that name, Ned stiffened. "Be careful. Stannis is no friend, but he will want the truth. He always has." "Then we'll give it to him," Jon said. "We'll burn the lies, and the Lannisters with them." Their eyes met, father and son. Both knew this might be the last time. "Tell Robb," Ned began, voice cracking. "Tell him to lead with heart, not rage. And tell your brothers." "I love them all," Jon nodded. "We'll get you out." "I swear it." A sound echoed down the hall. Varys hissed, "Go!" Jon backed into the tunnel, heart pounding. As the door closed behind him, he caught one last glimpse of his father, sitting tall despite the chains, the wolf of Winterfell unbowed. Outside, Ghost growled low. War was coming, and the North would remember. Robb Stark's army thundered south, the banners of House Stark fluttering in the wind like wolves preparing for blood. With every mile they crossed, the tension in the camp grew. News travelled fast. Lord Eddard Stark's execution loomed, and they were running out of time. Catelyn Stark rode with them now, having joined her son in River Run. Her face was drawn, her eyes rimmed red from sleepless nights. She had argued against Jon going alone, but Robb had held firm. He trusted Jon. More than that, he needed him. "Every day we march," she said quietly to Robb as they set up camp along the Trident. "They're tightening the noose around your father's neck." Robb stared into the fire, jaw clenched. "Then we ride harder." But deep down, even he knew they couldn't reach King's Landing before the Lannisters made their move. The capital wasn't just defended by stone. It was guarded by politics, gold, and fear. And if Jon had failed or been caught, then they'd already lost more than time. Meanwhile, Jon Snow crouched in the shadows of Blackwater Bay, a stolen city watchcloak thrown over his shoulders. Ghost lay beside him, ears twitching at every sound. The city was alive with rumors. Joffrey's upcoming Justice Day had turned into a celebration for some, and a sentence of death for others. Wine flowed in the streets while the bells prepared to toll. Jon's face was hard now. His mission had changed. He couldn't save his father alone, not from a king with no mercy and a queen with no soul. So he did what Jon Snow never imagined he would do. He planned to kill a king. The idea had been forming ever since his talk with Varys. If diplomacy failed, if the North couldn't arrive in time, then Jon would take the war straight to the heart of the enemy. He waited 2 more nights. Varys brought him stolen maps and whispers from Red Keep servants. Jon studied the king's routine, where Joffrey sat, when he walked, where the guards changed. The spider never promised success, only a chance. The plan was simple. During the execution, when the crowd gathered and the king stood proud on the steps of Baelor's Sept, Jon would strike. 1 arrow, that's all it would take. 1 arrow to end the madness before it could begin. It was suicide, but it might buy Robb the time he needed. Then came the morning of the execution. Jon stood atop a dusty rooftop, cloaked in rags, Longclaw strapped to his back and a borrowed bow in his hands. Below, the square outside the Sept filled with thousands. The city buzzed with excitement, treating the death of Ned Stark like a holiday. Commoners shoved each other for a better view. Soldiers lined the steps, and in the center, golden-haired and grinning, stood Joffrey Baratheon. Beside him, Cersei's face was carved from stone. Sansa stood nearby, pale and trembling. And then the doors of the Sept opened, and Lord Eddard Stark, bruised and broken, was dragged forward by 2 gold cloaks. Jon's breath caught. Even from this distance, he could see how weak his father looked. But his back was still straight. His eyes searched the crowd, maybe hoping to see a familiar face. Jon's heart pounded. He raised the bow. His fingers trembled. 1 arrow. That's all it would take. "Do you have any last words?" Joffrey's voice rang out like a curse across the square. Ned looked up, face calm. "I am Eddard Stark," he said. "I betrayed my king, Robert Baratheon. I plotted to steal the throne for my daughter's lover. I deserve the punishment you give me." The crowd roared. But Jon knew those words weren't his father's. They were Cersei's. Sansa's life had likely been the price for that lie. The executioner stepped forward. It was Sir Elin Payne. Jon drew the bowstring back. Ghost growled low. The moment stretched. He could kill Joffrey. Right now, he could send that little monster soul screaming into the abyss. But in the same moment, archers would fill him with arrows. His father would die anyway. Sansa would die, and the North would have no proof, no voice, no vengeance, only another dead wolf in the dirt. Then out of nowhere, a cry from the crowd. Steel clashed. Chaos erupted. Someone screamed, "The North remembers!" And in that instant, Robb Stark's vanguard exploded into the square from the western gate. Jon lowered his bow. He didn't need to kill the king. War had already arrived. The square outside Baelor's Sept was fire and madness. Robb Stark's forces poured through the western gate like a crashing wave, steel glinting in the sun, horses screaming, swords drawn, and red with the blood of Lannister guards. The people scattered in every direction, screaming, trampling over each other as chaos gripped the heart of King's Landing. Jon dropped the bow instantly, grabbed Longclaw, and leapt from the rooftop into a narrow alley. Ghost lunged beside him, ready for war. He had one goal now, find his father. If they had seconds, he'd use them. On the steps of the Sept, Sir Elin Payne hesitated. His sword was raised, but the sudden charge had broken his focus. Lord Eddard Stark remained on his knees, head bowed in false shame, until the roars reached his ears. He looked up, his grey eyes wide with disbelief. Robb had come. From behind Joffrey, the Kingsguard sprang into action. The boy king shrieked something, but no one listened. Cersei screamed for them to get him to safety. Sir Merentrant grabbed Joffrey and dragged him back toward the sept's doors. The crowd parted. The gold cloaks tried to form a line, but the Northerners were already upon them. Robb Stark himself led the charge. His horse crashed into the steps, cutting through the guards. Grey wind, his direwolf, followed like a white blur of teeth and death, tearing through Lannister soldiers without pause. "Father!" Robb shouted as he swung his blade at a gold cloak who lunged for Ned. Ned raised his head, struggling to his feet, chains still clamped to his wrists. Sir Ilyn tried again to step forward, but a northern spear caught him in the thigh, driving him back. Then Jon arrived. He moved like a shadow through the chaos, cutting down 2 guards with vicious precision. Ghost launched at Sir Meryn, forcing the knight to retreat and abandon Joffrey momentarily. Jon slid beside Ned, slashing through his chains. "I told you we'd come," Jon said breathlessly. Ned blinked in disbelief. "You damned fool," he whispered. "You broke every vow," Jon smiled grimly. "Aye, and I'd break them again." Together they stumbled down the steps as Robb rode to them. He jumped from his horse, catching Ned before he fell. "Get him out," Jon barked. "We hold here." Robb nodded once. "Go, we'll cover you." Ned was too weak to argue. Jon pulled him toward the alley, while Ghost circled around them protectively. Behind them, the square burned. The gold cloaks, stunned by the surprise attack, fell back toward the keep. Bells rang out. The city was fully awake now. By the time Jon and Ned reached the hidden tunnels Varys had shown him, the plan was already in motion. Northern riders secured the outer gates, while others moved toward the Red Keep itself. What had begun as a rescue had now turned into an uprising. In the tunnels, Maester Luwin was waiting with Catelyn and a small guard. Catelyn gasped when she saw Ned. "My love!" He collapsed into her arms, bloodied and pale. Jon stood back, his heart pounding, hands slick with blood. Not all of it was his enemies. "I'm fine," Ned whispered. "Robb!" "He's alive," Jon said. "And angry." That made Ned chuckle weakly. "Like his uncle. And like you." Outside, the battle raged on. The Red Keep's gate slammed shut, and Cersei vanished behind its walls, with Joffrey and what remained of the Kingsguard. But the city no longer belonged to them. The North had seized its throat, and they weren't letting go. By nightfall, thousands were dead. The sept was black with ash. The crown had fled behind stone walls. But Eddard Stark lived. That night, in a ruined chapel lit by candlelight, the Starks gathered. Robb sat with a goblet in hand, blood on his armor and fury in his eyes. Catelyn tended to Ned, who lay bandaged but awake. Jon stood guard near the door, Longclaw resting across his knees, Ghost silent at his side. "They'll regroup," Robb said. "Cersei won't yield. She'll wait for Tywin to bring the full force of the Westerlands. We won't hold the city long," Jon added. "We've shaken the crown, not taken it." Ned looked between them both. "Then we don't stay. We take what matters, truth, proof that Robert's death wasn't an accident, that Joffrey is not his son. We give the realm a reason to turn." Catelyn frowned. "You want to release Stannis?" "No," Ned said. "We want to convince Stannis, with evidence, with letters, with testimony. And we want the people to know the Lannisters murdered a king to crown a bastard." Robb leaned forward. "Then we need to move fast." Jon spoke the words aloud. "Before Tywin brings fire and blood." The wolves had howled. The realm had listened. But the storm was just beginning. The Red Keep was still standing, but its heart was trembling. The morning after the Stark-led uprising, the capital wore a new face, one of fear and uncertainty. Bodies still lined the square outside Baelor's sept, and smoke curled from rooftops where small fires had not yet been doused. The people of King's Landing didn't know whether to cheer or hide. Their king had vanished behind stone walls. Their traitor lord, Eddard Stark, was alive and breathing freely. And for the first time in living memory, the North had spilled blood in the capital and walked away unbroken. Inside an abandoned noble estate now claimed by Robb's forces, the War Council gathered. The air smelled of dust, blood, and boiling stew. Robb stood at the head of the table, armor still streaked with grime. Jon sat on his right, flanked by Great Jon Umber and the Blackfish, Brynden Tully, who had ridden fast from Riverrun to join them. Catelyn Stark stood with folded arms, watching her son and the bastard she had once distrusted so deeply. Eddard Stark lay upstairs under Maester Luwin's care, his wounds deep but no longer life-threatening. Every man in that room knew the same truth. They had snatched him from the jaws of death, but now the lion would bite back. "They won't let this go unanswered," Brynden said, voice low. "Tywin Lannister will march with everything he has. He'll paint our banners in blood from here to the neck," muttered Umber. Robb didn't blink. "Then we meet him with fire of our own." Jon leaned forward. "We can't win a war of strength. Not now, but we don't have to. We just need to win the realm." The Blackfish raised an eyebrow. "You mean the court of public opinion?" "No," Jon said coldly. "The court of truth. Joffrey is not Robert's son. He was never the rightful heir. Our father knew that. That's why they locked him up. That's why they tried to silence him. Robert was murdered so they could crown a bastard." The room fell silent. Robb nodded slowly. "And if we can prove that, the throne crumbles." Jon continued, "We have ravens, scribes, lords still loyal to the crown as it was. We spread the truth across the realm, to the Vale, to Dorne, to the Reach, to Stannis, especially Stannis," Robb added, "Robert's true brother. If he marches with cause. Not as a usurper, as the rightful heir," Catelyn frowned. "And what happens when Stannis takes the throne? Do you think he'll thank the North?" Jon looked at her. "We don't need thanks. We need the Lannisters out. The throne means nothing to us." Robb's voice was quiet but sharp. "We fight for justice, not crowns." The council ended with orders. Messages were to be sent immediately to every corner of Westeros, filled with Ned Stark's testimony, evidence Robert left behind, and Maester Pycelle's old records, some of which Varys had delivered the night before. The spider had vanished again, as always, but his trail of whispers lingered in every corner of the city. That night, Jon climbed to the top of the estate's old tower. He needed air. The city stretched before him, lit by torchlight and shadow. He could see the Red Keep in the distance, glowing faintly like a poisoned jewel. He felt no victory, only the weight of what was still coming. Ghost lay beside him, ears twitching at the wind. "You don't sleep either, huh?" Jon murmured. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to find Robb. "You always did like heights," Robb said, forcing a smile. Jon nodded. "Helps me think." They stood in silence for a moment. Brothers, though not by blood, now forged tighter than ever by war, loss, and the burdens that came with them. Robb finally said, "I saw you on the steps. You were going to kill him, weren't you?" Jon didn't look at him. "I had the shot," Robb exhaled slowly. "Why didn't you take it?" Jon turned his head, face unreadable. "Because we'd have lost everything. Father, Sansa, the city. Killing a king in broad daylight doesn't make you a hero. It makes you a madman." Robb nodded slowly, respecting the restraint. "You've changed." Jon looked down at the flickering lights. "We both have." A beat passed. Then Robb said something soft, something Jon had never expected to hear. "I'm glad you broke your vows." Jon looked over, surprised. "If you hadn't," Robb said, voice low, "Father would be dead. And I'd be alone." Jon didn't answer. He just nodded once. They stood in silence a while longer, two young men burdened with war, their childhoods left behind on the snow-covered walls of Winterfell. Far in the distance, across the fields and rivers of Westeros, Tywin Lannister was already on the move. And this time, he wasn't coming to play politics. He was coming for vengeance. The sun barely rose over the fields outside King's Landing before the first scouts arrived, bearing grim news. "Tywin Lannister marches with 20,000 men," the scout reported, dust still clinging to his cloak. "He's already crossed the Blackwater Rush. 2 days, maybe less, and he'll be at our gates." The war room fell into tense silence. Robb stood at the table, fists clenched, jaw set. Jon leaned against the stone wall, arms folded, while the rest of the council stared down at the painted map of the Crownlands. "He's not here to negotiate," said Brynden Tully, eyes narrowed. "He's here to crush us." "Then we don't give him the chance," Robb growled. "We meet him before he gets too close." Jon didn't speak. He had been quiet since the scout arrived, letting the others speak first. He understood what was coming. Tywin wasn't a king, but he was more dangerous than any crowned fool. The man didn't make threats, he made examples. "Attacking him head-on is suicide," said Maester Luwin. "You're outnumbered. You hold the capital, but only just. Your men are tired, stretched thin, and the city is still half full of Lannister spies." Robb paced the length of the room. "So what do you suggest? We hide behind the gates and wait for him to starve us out?" "No," Jon said suddenly. "We don't wait, and we don't face him in the open. We bleed him before he gets close." Robb turned. "How?" Jon moved to the table, pointing at a narrow pass near the edge of the Blackwater River. "He has to pass through here to reach the main road into the city. The terrain is tight, woods on both sides. We hit him there. Burn his supply wagons. Collapse the hillsides. Cut his strength before he ever sees the walls." "A guerrilla strike," Brynden said, a slow grin forming. "Not bad for a bastard." Jon ignored the comment. "We don't need to win. We just need to stall, long enough for the truth to spread, for the realm to turn." Robb nodded. "And if it doesn't?" Jon's voice hardened. "Then we die with honor, but not quietly." That evening they prepared. Jon led the first strike team, 36 riders, all fast and quiet. Northern scouts, archers, and 24 hounds. They left before midnight under a new moon, cloaked in black and grey, slipping through the woods like ghosts. As they rode, Jon's thoughts drifted back to Winterfell, to simpler days, riding beside Robb in the snow, laughing at Theon's boasting. Watching Arya fight Bran with wooden swords. Even his nights at the wall, cold and lonely as they were, seemed warmer than what he was riding into now. War had changed him, and yet a part of him still hoped for his father's freedom, for Sansa's safety, for the North to find peace. But peace would have to wait. By dawn, they were in position. Aewyn's army marched slowly through the valley, arrogant in its numbers. Crimson banners fluttered high, and golden lions glinted in the sun. Jon watched from the trees above, face painted in ash, bow in hand. He gave the signal. The forest exploded. Flaming arrows rained down on the wagons. Horses screamed. Men shouted. Boulders crashed from above as ropes were cut and hidden logs were released. Jon leapt into the fray with Longclaw drawn, cutting down a Lannister scout before the man could raise the alarm. It was brutal and fast. Fires swallowed supplies. Chaos reigned. Jon's men struck, then vanished like wolves into the trees. By the time Tywin regrouped, he had lost over 400 men and every wagon of food and siege gear. Back in King's Landing, Robb waited. When Jon returned, bloodied but alive, the entire estate erupted in cheers. But he didn't smile. His eyes were dark with what he'd seen. "It worked," he said to Robb, "but it won't stop him." Robb nodded. "No, but it slows him. And now the realm begins to whisper. Indeed, the ravens had flown. Word spread like wildfire. That Robert had been murdered. That Joffrey was no king. That the North had freed Eddard Stark and held the city. That Stannis Baratheon had begun gathering ships in Dragonstone. And with every whisper, the lion's grip weakened. But Tywin wasn't done. 2 nights later, under cover of darkness, a second force attacked the outer gates of the city. Mercenaries, assassins, hired blades from the free cities. They failed to take the gate, but they didn't come for the walls. They came for Ned Stark. Jon found the first assassin in the hallway outside Ned's chamber. He was quick, but not quicker than Ghost. The direwolf tore his throat before the man could raise a blade. 2 more came in through the kitchens. Robb's guards cut them down, but the message was clear. Tywin didn't care about winning a war of honor. He only wanted the head of the man who had humiliated his house. The next morning, the estate smelled of blood. 3 dead men lay outside the kitchens, their bodies stripped of weapons and dignity. One of them had worn the black of the city watch, but his coin purse was too fat to belong to a loyal guardsman. Another wore the sigil of House Lannister sewn beneath his cloak, poorly hidden. The last had no face at all, his skin burned off, possibly by wildfire. They were tools, not soldiers. and their only purpose had been to leave Lord Eddard Stark in a pool of his own blood. He had survived, but barely. The blade had nicked his ribs as he slept. A poisoned dagger meant to finish what Joffrey couldn't. It was Ghost who saved him, again, leaping onto the attacker before he could twist the blade deeper. Jon had arrived seconds later, and what he did to the assassin wasn't clean. Now Jon stood outside his father's chambers, his hands still red despite 3 washings. "He's stable," Maester Luwin said quietly, wrapping clean linen around his fingers. "But weak, and the poison was fast. Even with our treatment, he may not wake for some time." Jon stared at the floor, fists trembling. "They'll keep coming." Robb stood nearby, face grim, watching his brother with the wary look of a man seeing a fire that might spread. "They don't want to win this war, Jon," he said. "They want to end it, with our father's head on a spike." Jon didn't answer. He'd spent the last night slashing a man's throat open, screaming into his ear as he died. Something inside him had broken. Honor, patience, restraint, all of it burned up like paper in flame. That night he didn't go back to his bed. He stood atop the estate roof again, watching the Red Keep glow in the distance. It mocked him, its high towers, its guarded gates, its deep black secrets. Somewhere inside it, Cersei sat behind silk and steel, drinking wine and spinning lies. Joffrey probably played with a wooden sword, dreaming of war, while Tywin sharpened real ones. Robb joined him later. "I need you to listen," Robb said quietly. "We can't keep fighting like this. Picking them off, bleeding them slowly. It's not enough anymore." Jon turned his head. "Then what? You want to siege the keep?" Robb hesitated. "I want to end this, swiftly, one stroke." Jon raised an eyebrow. "We go in," Robb continued. "Not with an army, with 10 of our best. We take the tunnels Varys mapped for you. We get into the Red Keep, and we take Cersei." Jon blinked. "Kidnap the queen?" Robb nodded. "Or kill her." Jon whistled softly, shaking his head. "That's a dangerous plan." "It's a desperate one," Robb replied. "But she's the head of the snake. Without her, Joffrey falls. Tywin loses his voice in the capital, and the realm sees us not as rebels, but as men who cut out corruption by the root." Jon looked out over the city. "What if we fail?" Robb didn't answer. He didn't need to. If they failed, they would die in silence beneath the Red Keep. If they succeeded, the war would change forever. Later that night, the council gathered. There were no arguments, no shouting. Not anymore! The enemy had tried to assassinate Ned Stark in the dark. That sealed the fate of diplomacy. Brynden Tully, Great Janumba, and even Catelyn, though reluctant, all gave their blessing. 10 men were chosen, silent, loyal, fierce. Among them were 2 scouts who had fought at the wall, 1 mute thief turned killer, and a former sellsword who owed Jon his life. And Jon, of course, would lead them. Robb had to remain behind to hold the city. Before he left, Jon visited his father's bedside. Ned hadn't woken, but Jon knelt beside him, took his hand and whispered, "I'm sorry for what I've become, but I won't let them take you again." Then he stood, fastened Longclaw to his back, and disappeared into the tunnels beneath the city. The passage Varys had shown him was narrow and wet. It smelled like mold, blood, and old rot. Rats scattered before them. Every step was a heartbeat closer to death. They emerged beneath the Red Keep's outer wall hours later, slipping in through a forgotten drainage gate. From there it was silence and shadows. Jon remembered his time at the wall, how to move quiet, how to breathe through fear. He remembered what Arya had once told him as a child. You have to move like you're not even there. They crossed 2 halls, past a guard station, then another. Not a sound. Finally they reached the Queen's tower. Jon raised his hand. They drew blades. Ghost crept forward, red eyes gleaming. The lioness was about to wake to the sound of wolves. The Queen's tower loomed tall and still, moonlight crawling across its stone like fingers searching for secrets. Jon Snow crouched at its base, the cold hilt of Longclaw pressed against his palm. Behind him the others waited, silent, disciplined, deadly. Ghost, nearly invisible in the night, was already inside through a servant's broken door. Jon gave the signal. A small knock twice. The door creaked open. No guards, no shouting. Just an empty corridor lined with velvet and gold. They slipped inside like shadows. No one spoke. The only sound was the soft thud of boots against polished stone and the distant crackle of a fireplace somewhere above. Jon's breath stayed steady. He was beyond nerves now. Rage lived in his blood, steady and clear. This wasn't revenge. It was reckoning. They climbed 2 flights of stairs, blades drawn. A maid appeared at the end of the hallway. She opened her mouth, then saw Ghost. She dropped her tray and fainted before she could scream. Room by room they cleared the tower, working their way up. At the top level, outside the Queen's private chamber, 2 Lannister guards stood lazily half asleep. Jon didn't hesitate. He lunged before the first man could raise his spear. Longclaw opened his throat with 1 clean slice. The second swung at Ghost, who dodged and tore the man's leg out from under him. The man's scream was cut off with a dagger in the heart. The wolves had come. Jon kicked the chamber door open. Inside, Cersei Lannister turned slowly, her golden hair loose around her shoulders, her goblet of wine tipping slightly in her fingers. She did not scream. She did not flinch. She only stared. "Well," she said calmly, "so the bastards really have taken the capital." "Get up!" Jon growled. She sipped her wine instead. "I assume you're here to kill me. Or perhaps you'd rather parade me through the streets like some common whore." "I'm not here to talk," Jon said. "But you are," she replied unfazed. "Because if you weren't, you'd have already slit my throat." Jon stepped closer. "You tried to murder my father in his sleep." Cersei's eyes flashed. "He tried to destroy my family. You Northerners act like you're the only ones who've bled. We don't poison kings," Jon snapped. "No," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You just raise armies and send your children to die for honor." He moved forward, but one of the men stopped him. "She's not worth it," the scout murmured. Jon stared at her. He wanted to kill her, wanted to feel Longclaw bite into that porcelain skin, to see her bleed for what she'd done. For Robert, for Ned, for the butchered truth. But killing her here wouldn't change the war. So instead he nodded. "Bind her, gag her. If she speaks again, silence her." 2 men grabbed her. She didn't resist, she only laughed. A cruel, hollow sound. "You think you've won?" She sneered as they dragged her out. "My father will bury you all. He's done it before. He'll do it again." Jon watched her disappear down the steps, then looked out her window. The Red Keep was now half theirs, and the Queen, the lioness herself, was in chains. They returned to the estate under cover of night, with Cersei drugged, gagged, and bound in the back of a stolen Lannister carriage. Not a soul knew she was gone yet. Robb was waiting, sword at his hip, bloodshot eyes wide when he saw her dragged out and thrown to the ground like a sack of grain. "You actually did it," he muttered. Jon said nothing. He simply handed Robb a folded scrap of parchment. This was under her bed, sealed. It's a confession of sorts. She and Jaime, their children, the poison, everything. Catelyn gasped. Bryndon's eyes widened. "That's your dagger now," Jon said. "Use it," and they did. Within a day, ravens flew out in every direction. With Cersei in chains and her letter in northern hands, the narrative began to shatter. Lords who had once sworn to King Joffrey now paused. The Vale refused to send aid. The Reach hesitated. Dawn, still bitter from Elyr's murder, remained cold and silent. Then word came from Dragonstone. Stannis Baratheon would ride, not for Jon, not for Robb, but for truth, for blood. 3 weeks later, Tywin Lannister's army reached King's Landing. What he found was not a frightened rebellion, but a city ready for war, its gates shut, its walls reinforced, and his daughter's crimes screaming from every raven in the sky. Ned Stark, pale but alive, stood on the walls beside Robb. Tywin did not attack. He could not win that war, not without turning half the realm against him, not without drawing in every grudge that House Lannister had buried in gold and threats. So he waited, but the wolves did not. Robb Stark declared the Kingdom of the North reborn, not for ambition, but for survival. Jon Snow refused a lordship. He returned to the shadows, guarding Ned and the younger siblings from what remained of Lannister assassins. Ghost never left his side again. In the end, it was not one sword that won the war, nor one battle, but the truth, pried from the fangs of a lioness and carried by a bastard who broke every vow he ever made for the family he never thought he'd have. The realm would never forget it, because the North remembered, and this time they made sure the world did too.